So psychologists are also interested in the cognitive processes involved in these various stages of the creative process. So there's different methods that we use to get at this. One method is we can look inside your brain now. We can use fMRI or PET scan techniques to see what areas of your brain are lighting up depending on the different stages of the creative process and depending on what you're doing. Some people think it's a very fruitful approach to understanding creativity. We have other methods. We can bring students into the laboratory and we can give them creativity tests. And we can say, be as creative as can be. And we can measure their creativity. We can actually do a combination of these methods. So we can have people do creativity tests ahead of time and then look inside their brain and see what is the structure of their brain. What do they have that differentiates, be creative from the less creative? And obviously these things, brain activations and all these biological things are constantly changing throughout the course of your lifetime and when you're engaging in different things. So is it the case that when you're engaging in a form of creativity that really excites you and really attracts you, that somehow that intrinsic motivation is related to a form of biology, brain and hormonal changes, as opposed to when you're engaging in a form of creativity that doesn't interest you as much? So we're trying to answer these sorts of questions. On the product side, we can look at various products and try to understand what cognitive processes allow us to perceive these various things. And why do some people find some things funny and some things not funny? Raise your hand if you find this cartoon funny at all. So there's individual differences in this. Some of you don't find this funny at all. And I think it's an interesting question. What is causing the individual differences? Clearly our lifetime of experiences have gotten us to this stage and it strongly influenced our perception of a creative product. For some this may be creative, for others it's not. So it's an interesting question. Raise your hand if you think this painting is creative. Who knows what this is? It's polish. Very good. So, in some contemporary art, there's questions about, are these things really creative? Are really just the classical forms of art, like in contemporary art of various sorts, be creative? What does it even mean for them to be creative? Do you have to have a certain level of expertise for it to be called creative? What if a 3-year-old who couldn't care less about the art world happened to produce that same exact painting that you see there? Would you pay as much money for it as you would for a Pollock? It's an interesting question. Another idea is, this is from Hamlet. And some of you, raise your hand if you are the type of person where if you read this, you would just savor every morsel, every sentence. You'd be like, linguistic beauty. None of you. Poor Shakespeare. So this is a very interesting question. Is what form of poetry or great literature? What makes great literature in the first place? And why do some people think it's great literature? Other people don't. Lastly, psychologists, by the way, these are the 4 Ps that I'm elucidating here. So this is the 4th one now, press. They had to come up with some way to come up with a 4th P, so they call it a press. It really should be environment, but it wouldn't be, PVPE is not as cool as like the 4 Ps. If anyone has any ideas about what to rename this, please tell me. Maybe David Chalmers had a good video at one point. Anyway, so the press. So even, no matter how creative you are as an individual, you're still operating within the constraints of society. So for instance, in 17th century Florence, sculptors and painters, there was a huge flourishing of sculpture and art. And clearly that wasn't strictly due to individual ability. It was a very tightly intertwined interaction between the individual, the time period, and all those who were interested in sorts of questions. You had a lot of competition involved during this time period as well. Lots of people trying to better each other. And that really influenced the overall, how many people were involved. But you also, in that time period, are at the mercy of gatekeepers, just as much as you are today at the mercy of those who decide whether or not your great idea goes through or not. Even society may love something, but gatekeepers, through a whole slew of reasons, might deny your idea. Sometimes the reason could be as petty as, it's too close to my idea, and I'm not going to let someone through, even though that person may have a genius idea. So you really have to understand all these different factors are involved in the creative process. So that's the psychology. psychology of creativity. And now my colleague, we'll talk about the philosophy of creativity.